$187,400. That's the number. That's what disappeared from 3 different accounts: mine, my late father's trust, and a joint savings account that, as it turns out, was never actually joint at all, over the 11 months I was engaged to a woman named Vanessa Cole. I want you to sit with that number for a second, because by the time this video is over, you're going to know exactly where every single dollar of it went. You're going to see the bank statements. You're going to see the text messages. You're going to see the moment I found the first crack in a story she had been building brick by brick for almost a year. Here's the part that made this different from every other story I've told you. Vanessa didn't just take my money. When it all fell apart, she got in front of it. She posted the breakup on social media first, 3 days before I even knew what she'd done, and she cast herself as the victim, the heartbroken fiancé who gave everything to a man who checked out emotionally. She had 40,000 followers nodding along, sending her heart emojis, telling her she deserved better. She rewrote our entire engagement into a story where she was the hero and I was the villain. They thought they got away with it. They were wrong. This is the story of how I built a case, dollar by dollar, message by message, until the truth was no longer something she could spin, and how, when we finally told the real version publicly with receipts, it didn't just clear my name. It got every cent back, and it put her in front of a judge. Before we get into it, if you're new here, welcome. Every week on this channel, I tell you true stories about people who thought they'd outsmart the system, outsmarted the people who trusted them, and thought they'd never be caught. Today's story is about greed, betrayal, and getting every single dollar back. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe people who do this should face real consequences, hit subscribe now, because there's a smoking gun moment coming in about 8 minutes that you do not want to miss. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you're gonna want to know what happens to Vanessa Cole. Let's get into it. To understand how this happened to me, you need to understand where I was in my life when Vanessa Cole walked into it. I'm Mark. I was 34 years old, an operations manager at a regional logistics company outside Columbus, Ohio, making decent money, around $94,000 a year. And I had just come out of a difficult 2 years. My father had passed away 18 months earlier from ovarian cancer, pancreatic cancer, and he'd left me something most guys my age don't have: a trust. Not a massive one. $210,000, structured through a revocable trust that named me as sole beneficiary, administered by a small local trust company, because my father, a retired accountant himself, didn't trust banks with big departments and impersonal advisors. I was grieving. I was also, for the first time in my adult life, financially comfortable. That combination, grief plus a financial cushion, is, I would later learn from the detective who worked my case, one of the most common vulnerability windows that financial predators specifically look for. I met Vanessa at a charity 5K in April. She told me she worked in brand consulting for boutique wellness companies. She was warm, funny, incredibly attentive. She remembered small details about my father within days of me mentioning him. She asked thoughtful questions about grief. She cried, genuinely it seemed, when I told her about the last conversation I had with him. Looking back now, I can tell you, everything about those early weeks was designed. Vanessa moved fast, but not in a way that felt fast at the time. That's important because a lot of you watching this are going to recognize this pattern. Within 6 weeks, she'd introduced me to 2 friends who vouched for her, a woman named Priya, who she said she'd known since college, and a man named Ben, who she introduced as her business mentor. Both of them spoke glowingly about her work ethic, her honesty, her track record helping small businesses scale. I later learned, and this is something you should write down if you're in a new relationship with someone who seems too good to be true, neither Priya nor Ben could be independently verified as having known Vanessa for more than 4 months before I met her. One of them, it turned out, had been paid. By month 3, she was staying at my place 4 or 5 nights a week. She talked constantly about the future, a house with a wraparound porch, kids' names she liked, the wedding she'd always dreamed of having in the fall because fall light is the most flattering, she'd say. She talked about money in a very specific, calculated way, never asking directly, always framing things as opportunities I'd be foolish to pass up.
I want to walk through the warning signs I missed because I promise you, if you're watching this and something in your gut has been uneasy about someone in your life, you are going to recognize at least 2 or 3 of these. First, she never let me meet her family. Every time I brought it up, there was a reason. Her mother was difficult, her father wasn't in the picture, her sister was going through something. In 11 months, I never spoke to a single blood relative of Vanessa's Coles. Second, her income never matched her lifestyle. She drove a leased Audi, wore designer clothes, and took 2 international trips during our relationship, yet she was constantly between clients or waiting on an invoice. Third, she was extremely comfortable talking about my late father's money, far more comfortable than I was. Within 4 months, she knew the exact structure of my trust, the name of the trust company, and the approximate balance. Details I don't remember explicitly telling her, which means she was either paying very close attention or asking questions I wasn't fully registering as questions. Fourth, and this is the big one, she proposed the joint account. It was August, 4 months in, when Vanessa suggested we open what she called a wedding and future fund, a joint account where we'd both contribute toward the wedding, a house down payment, and our life. She framed it as a trust exercise. If we can't be financially honest with each other now, she said, how are we going to be married? I want to be honest with you. That line worked. It worked because it wasn't crazy. Plenty of engaged couples open joint accounts. The difference, and I didn't find this out until months later, is that the account she walked me into at a regional credit union was not actually a joint account. It was a personal account in her name, with me added only as an authorized user, a designation that, critically, does not carry ownership rights or equal legal claim to funds. I signed paperwork on a tablet in a 15-minute branch visit, trusting her explanation of what I was signing, and I never independently read the account agreement. Over the following 7 months, I deposited $61,000 into that account, savings, a portion of 2 bonuses, and, at her suggestion, an early $40,000 gift distribution I requested from my father's trust for wedding expenses, a distribution the trust company processed because I was the sole beneficiary with discretionary withdrawal rights. That single decision, pulling money out of a protected trust structure into an account I did not legally co-own, is the decision that would nearly cost me everything. And it's a decision I want you to remember if you ever find yourself being gently, warmly, persistently guided toward combining finances faster than your gut is comfortable with. By March, we were engaged. 3-carat cushion cut, $28,000, financed through a jeweler she picked out. The ring, I'll tell you now, is relevant later. Very relevant. By April, the account I thought was ours held $103,000 of my money. That's when things started to change. In late April, I went to transfer $4,000 out of the joint account to cover an unexpected car repair. It was a routine thing. I'd done it twice before without issue. This time, the transfer failed. Insufficient funds. I remember staring at my phone in the parking lot of my mechanic shop, genuinely confused, because as far as I knew, that account held over $100,000. I called the credit union. Because I was only listed as an authorized user, not a joint owner, the representative could confirm the account existed and that a transaction had failed, but couldn't disclose the balance or transaction history to me without the primary account holder's consent. That sentence is the moment my entire understanding of my relationship collapsed. I was not a joint owner of an account I had put $103,000 into. I had no legal right to see what had happened to my own money. I want to give you the full accounting now, because this is the part where the numbers really start to add up, and I promise you, it gets worse before it gets better. Over the next several days, working with a banking dispute specialist and later a forensic accountant, here's what we reconstructed. $103,000 in direct deposits I made into the account Vanessa controlled between August and April. $40,000 from the early trust distribution I'd requested, deposited directly into that same account. $18,400 in charges on a joint credit card she convinced me to open for wedding vendors, which I discovered had a running balance I'd been unknowingly making minimum payments on while she made additional charges. $26,000, the estimated value of the engagement ring, purchased on financing under my name, and roughly $3,000 in various smaller transfers, gifts, and loans over the relationship. The total exposure, $187,400 and climbing, before legal fees, before interest, before the emotional cost that no accountant can put a number on. Of the $143,000 sitting in the account she controlled when the dust settled, the balance was $6,211. $137,000 had moved. My first instinct wasn't detective work, it was to talk to her. I confronted Vanessa that same night. She cried immediately, genuine, racking sobs, and told me there'd been an emergency with her sister, that she'd used some of our money to help, that she was going to pay it back, that I was attacking her during a stressful time, and she couldn't believe I didn't trust her. I want to flag something here for anyone watching this who's in a similar situation right now. Immediate, intense emotional escalation in response to a financial question is not proof of guilt on its own, but it is a pattern worth paying close attention to, especially when it's paired with vague explanations that don't hold up to basic follow-up questions. When I asked which sister, she told me at different points she had one sister, then referenced sisters, plural. She got angry and left. I let it go for 11 days. That's on me. Grief, love, and shame are a powerful combination for keeping people quiet, and I want to be honest about that instead of pretending I turn into a hardened investigator overnight.
While I was still trying to give her the benefit of the doubt, Vanessa was doing three things simultaneously, which I only pieced together weeks later. First, she began transferring smaller amounts, under $2,000 at a time, several times a week, to a secondary account at a different bank. A pattern that I'd later learn from a fraud investigator is a classic structuring technique designed to avoid triggering the kind of automated large transaction alerts that banks use for anti-money laundering compliance. Second, she began quietly liquidating. Bank records would later show a $9,000 transfer to an account associated with the jewelry consignment shop 3 counties over. The same week, it turned out, she'd had a second engagement ring appraised, one I never knew existed. Third, and this is the part that still gets me, she started writing her narrative. Screenshots later recovered showed private messages to 2 friends, drafted days before our confrontation, laying groundwork. Mark's been different lately, distant. I think something's wrong. I don't know what I did. I've given him everything. She was building the public story before I even knew there was a private one to hide. 11 days after that first confrontation, I checked our shared photo cloud account, one she'd forgotten to remove me from, and found a folder labeled Miami. 4 days of photos from a trip taken 2 weeks earlier, a trip she'd told me was a work conference in Chicago. And that's when I found the smoking gun, because in the background of one photo on a hotel nightstand was a receipt. And the name on that receipt, printed clear as day, was not the work client she'd told me she was meeting. It was a man I'd never heard of. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a forensic accountant, I'm not a cop, but over the following 4 months, I became a version of all three, because I quickly learned something that I want every person watching this to understand. When someone financially exploits you inside a relationship, the burden of proof, in the eyes of banks, courts, and even some family members, is going to fall almost entirely on you. So I built the case the way I've been trained to build operational reports at my job, methodically, with dates, with sourcing, with backup for every claim. My first move was pulling every bank statement I had access to. My accounts, the joint credit card, the trust distribution records, going back 14 months. I built a spreadsheet. Every transaction, every date, every dollar amount, cross-referenced against my own calendar and text messages to establish context. What was I told this money was for versus where a forensic trace showed it actually went? I hired a forensic accountant, Denise Okafa, who specializes in relationship-based financial fraud, a growing niche, she told me, because romance-adjacent financial exploitation has become one of the fastest-raising fraud categories reported to the FTC over the past several years. Her fee was $6,500. It was, without question, the best money I spent during this entire ordeal. Denise's report traced the $137,000 that had moved out of the joint account into four destinations: $61,000 across 11 transfers to the secondary account at the second bank, $34,000 in direct payments to a private jeweler and a consignment shop, $22,000 in charges and cash withdrawals during two undisclosed trips, the Miami trip and a second one to Nashville I hadn't known about at all, and $20,000 that had gone to something labeled only as Coastline Ventures LLC, a name that meant nothing to me at the time, but would end up being the single most important discovery in this entire investigation. I filed a public record search on Coastline Ventures LLC. It had been registered 4 months before Vanessa and I got engaged. The registered agent was Vanessa Cole. Coastline Ventures wasn't a wellness brand consultancy. According to the state business filing, it was registered as a personal styling and events LLC. Denise's deeper trace found that Coastline Ventures had received deposits not just from our joint account, but from at least two other sources. Payments from two other men, both of whom, it turned out, had also been engaged to Vanessa Cole in the preceding 6 years. I was not her first fiancé. I was her third. At this point, I brought in an attorney, Rachel Timms, who specializes in civil fraud recovery. She explained my legal options clearly. Because Vanessa and I were never married, I had no claim to marital asset division, but I had strong civil claims for fraud, conversion, and unjust enrichment, since I could document that funds were obtained through misrepresentation and never used for their stated purpose. We also filed a police report, which led to a detective in the local financial crimes unit opening a file. And because Coastline Ventures had taken money across state lines from at least one of the other men, the case eventually drew interest from federal investigators, who flagged it as a potential pattern of wire fraud. I also filed a complaint with the FTC's fraud reporting system, which, while it doesn't directly recover individual funds, helps build the aggregated pattern data that federal and state prosecutors use to justify opening larger cases. And in my situation, it turned out my complaint was the third one on file naming Vanessa Cole or Coastline Ventures LLC. I have to tell you about the two moments this almost fell apart, because it very nearly did. 3 weeks into the investigation, Vanessa got wind, through a mutual friend, that I'd hired a forensic accountant. Bank records show she attempted to transfer the remaining $6,211 out of the account within 48 hours and attempted to close the account entirely. It was only because my attorney had, days earlier, sent the credit union a formal fraud dispute letter that the account was placed under a temporary hold, freezing what was left before it could disappear too. Then Vanessa's attorney, she'd retained one quickly when she realized I wasn't backing down, attempted to argue that all funds transferred into the joint account were gifts, which under some state laws can be legally difficult to reclaim once given, especially between engaged partners. This is a real legal gray area, and I want to be honest with you. For about 10 days, it looked like this argument might actually work, and I might never see most of that money again. What broke it was the paper trail Denise had built. Gifts don't typically come with a documented repeated pattern of stated purpose for the wedding, for our house, for our future, texted in writing, dozens of times establishing what's known in fraud law as detrimental reliance on a specific representation rather than unconditional gifting. My attorney argued, and the court ultimately agreed, that funds given for a stated specific purpose that was never fulfilled are recoverable, particularly when there's a documented pattern of misrepresentation about how they be used. That argument, built entirely from a year of text messages I'd almost deleted in anger, is what turned the tide. 14 months after that failed $4,000 transfer in a mechanic's parking lot, the case resolved in two parts. Civilly, Vanessa Cole was found liable for fraud and unjust enrichment. The judgment, $151,000, covering the trace misappropriated funds plus a portion of legal fees, to be paid through a structured settlement, a lien placed against her future income and remaining assets, including forced liquidation of the leased vehicle's buyout equity, and a judgment against Coastline Ventures LLC directly. Criminally, because the investigation had uncovered a pattern involving multiple victims and interstate transfers, prosecutors charged Vanessa Cole with felony theft by deception and one count tied to the interstate financial activity. She accepted a plea agreement, 18 months with a portion suspended pending full restitution, plus 5 years of financial probation requiring court oversight of any account she opens. Here's the part of this story that I genuinely did not see coming, and it recontextualizes almost everything. Denise's forensic trace on Coastline Ventures LLC
found that the $20,000 that had passed through it, combined with money from at least one of the other men, had funded something specific: a rotating pattern of engagement rings, purchased, worn, then quietly sold or pawned once a relationship ended, alongside a lifestyle of trips and appearances designed entirely to maintain an image on social media, where Vanessa had built a modest following as an aspirational, engaged, and building our future lifestyle influencer, monetized through affiliate brand deals with wedding and home decor companies.
The ring on her hand, the house tours she filmed for our future home, the captions about trust, love, and building a life together. Every one of them had been in part sponsored content. She wasn't just taking money from her fiancés, she was building a public brand on top of the theft and using the appearance of our engagement itself as a revenue stream, separate from what she was quietly draining from our accounts. Her public breakup post, the one where she cast herself as the wronged party 3 days before I even knew what had happened, had over 40,000 views, and, I later learned, was published the same week she had already begun consulting with her own attorney about how to frame the relationship's end. This is where the title of this video comes from, and I want to be transparent about exactly what we did and why. Once the civil judgment was final and public record, and once my attorney confirmed I was legally cleared to discuss factual, documented events, I posted the real timeline, not an emotional rant, a factual accounting. Dates, amounts, the court judgment, screenshots of the specific representations made about how the money would be used contrasted against where it actually went. I didn't editorialize about her character. I didn't need to. The receipts did that. Within a week, 2 of the other men Vanessa had been engaged to reached out. One had never pursued legal action, assuming, as so many people do, that once money is gone in a relationship, it's simply gone, that there's no path to recovery. He hadn't known Coastline Ventures LLC existed as a business entity with public filings until I posted our timeline. His case is still working through the system, but with our combined documentation, his attorney tells me the pattern evidence alone makes his recovery far more likely than it would have been alone. As of the most recent restitution payment, I've recovered $94,000 of the $151,000 judgment through the structured payment plan, with the remainder scheduled over the next several years, monitored by the court. I also did something I should have done from the very beginning. I restructured my finances entirely. My father's trust, what's left of it, is now managed with a co-trustee requirement for any distribution over $5,000. I use only accounts where I am a verified, documented joint owner with full transaction visibility. And I've become, admittedly, a much harder person to move quickly financially in any relationship. That's not cynicism. I'd call it earned caution. If you've made it this far, I want to leave you with something more useful than just the satisfaction of watching a scammer get caught, because that satisfaction only means something if it helps protect the next person. Here are the warning signs, straight from what I learned the hard way.
1. Be cautious of anyone who wants to combine finances significantly faster than feels natural to you, especially if it's framed as a test of trust or commitment. 2. Always independently verify what you're signing at a bank. Authorized user and joint owner are legally different, and the difference can cost you everything. 3. Pay attention if someone you're dating seems unusually comfortable discussing the specifics of your assets, inheritance, or savings early in a relationship. 4. If someone reacts to a simple financial question with intense emotional escalation rather than a clear, verifiable answer, that reaction is data. Pay attention to it. 5. You can request a distribution from a trust or protected account, but you should always ask yourself, would I be making this decision on this timeline if I weren't currently in a relationship with this person? And 6, maybe the most important one, document everything as you go, even when things feel fine. I nearly lost this case in its early weeks because I'd almost deleted a year of text messages out of anger and heartbreak. Those messages ended up being the foundation of the entire legal argument that got my money back. If you've been through something like this, if someone you trusted took more than money from you, I want to hear about it. Tell me what happened in the comments below. You are not the only one, and telling the real version of your story publicly with facts might be exactly what someone else needs to see to protect themselves too. If this story mattered to you, subscribe, because next week I'm telling you about a small business owner who discovered her silent partner had been silently emptying the business account for 3 years, and how one overlooked QuickBooks login is what finally brought the whole thing down. Thank you for watching. Stay sharp out there.